Hi, I'm Mike Abbott. Welcome to Founder Stories. With me today we have Stephen Kirsch from OneID.
Mike.
Welcome, Stephen.
Thanks.
So first, tell us a little bit about OneID.
Well, OneID arose from my frustration and my siblings' frustrations with the username and password system and just having too many usernames and passwords to manage. And my sister called me up and said her Yahoo account got broken into, and she asked me for advice because I'm the computer expert in the family. And so I said, well, change your password, run a malware checker. And she said, okay, fine. If I do all that, then how do I know it's safe to log into my bank or PayPal? And I said, well, you don't. And that was just a horrible thing to have to tell my sister in 2011, with all this technology, that you don't know whether it's safe to log into your bank or PayPal. And so with that was kind of the impetus to say, hey, we need to fix this problem. This is ridiculous that we don't have a solution to this, being able to have a secure login, a secure identity, to have a single identity that we can assert anywhere on the internet and have it be accepted. And so you have a U.S. passport, which is accepted in the U.S., it's accepted by state agencies, it's accepted around the world. And yet we don't have the analogous type of identity where you can have a single identity and present that to any website and have them accept that as your identity. And so that's why we started OneID, to provide that sort of single identity that you can use anywhere, one password to remember, and we use public key cryptography in order to keep it secure. And we've done all sorts of clever things so that even if your device is stolen or whatever, that your identity can't be compromised. Even if someone broke into our servers and changed all our code, they still can't compromise your identity. And that's a big, big shift from where we are before, where we can actually create an identity that is a third-party identity service that is actually more trustable than the native identity of a bank or any website.
Well, one of the things that's so remarkable to me about your background is OneID is your 6th startup. You've had big successes, big companies like Infoseek. You started in '82, building the first optical mouse.
That's right. Across
6 companies, and combined with the fact that, you're academically studied computer science and engineering at MIT, tell us a little bit about you as a CEO through those 6 companies, and perhaps you weren't the CEO at each one, but just share with us a little bit like how you changed as a leader across those companies and embody that today at OneID.
Well, you have to try to, hopefully learn a little bit along the way. But one of the things I found is you make very similar mistakes from company to company, and you think you'd learn from your mistakes, but people have different skills, and they have particular ways about going about things, and those tend not to change very much. People are very hard to change. And so the big learning is, hey, what are you really good at, and what are your strengths? And then try to surround yourself with people who have complementary skills, because you're not going to be able to do something that you weren't good at before necessarily. It's probably not going to happen, especially at our age. And if you're more than 12 years old, I think you're pretty much wired. And behavioral change is really, really hard. So focus on what you really like to do well. And one of the other thing I learned is that being the chief technology guy and being the CEO at the same time, that's really, really hard. Kind of pick one that you're going to do, and don't try and do them both, because trying to do both is very, very difficult. And try to surround yourself with people that will keep you from making the same mistakes. So for example, I tended to underhire people. When I first started, I said, hey, I can work with anyone, and then we can train them and get them up to speed and so forth. Hiring, I think, is the number one most important thing. The number one biggest thing that you can do as a CEO that's going to determine your fate as a company. And you look at companies like Google, and you look at Tesla, for example. Tesla's really remarkable, right? You go from car company that now has a 99 out of 100 score at Consumer Reports. And the reason they did that, and the thing that most impressed me about Tesla, was that they hired just brilliant people who were really experts in their area, and they spent a lot of time on the recruiting and the hiring, and they don't hire people unless they can show a special skill. How are you different? How are you, 1 out of 100? And you have to prove to them that you can do that, or Elon's not going to sign off on your being hired there. So the quality of the people, pay attention to that. That's, if there is one lesson that I learned that's the biggest ingredient to success. And you look at Google. The reason Google is so successful is they said, hey, we're only going to hire people from the Ivy Leagues and MIT and all these places. And they make exceptions in a few cases, but they're pretty much going after super, super bright people. And so that's, and look at how well they're doing.
Mm-hmm. So digging in on a little bit more around quality, because I completely agree with you. What have you learned, or how do you apply ensuring quality in your hiring at OneID from your lessons from the prior 5 companies?
Yeah, so I'm not sure we do the best job at it, but we try. I think the best thing that I've seen on hiring on the web that people can look at as a resource is the Greylock. Have you seen that? There's a presentation by Greylock in terms of how the Greylock companies hire people, and I think we aspire to do that. But we try and copy some of the ideas that we've learned from other companies in terms of, hey, what's their background, what's their skill, what separates you, why are you special, what's your superpower, kind of thing. So really finding out that these guys are cut above just the regular crowd. We don't want to hire someone who can do the job. We want to hire someone who's going to really enhance the position. So we're looking for special qualities in the people that will make them different. And we're not going to hire the first person, second person, third person. I mean, we tend to interview a bunch of people for the job and not kind of jump at the first person to see who's out there, see who we can get, and then make a decision. So you may interview 10 people and hire one, and that's what you should be doing because you really want to get the best people. It's like it's Hey Stanford, right? They only take 3% of the students that apply, right? You want to be just like that, right? And so you go to Stanford, right? And you talk to any of the students there, and the students there are incredible. My daughter was lucky enough to get in, and she introduces to her friends, and they're just each one of them is just very, very special in a different way, and it's that great combination of intelligence and people working together that can really make a difference in any company.
So if the quality of people is a common thread, which makes great sense, if you look back between the 80s and the 90s and even the 2000s, one of the things that has changed a lot is just how products and software is built.
Yeah.
And OneID today is about, you said 20 people or so, half an engineering, product manager, designer. How do you build your product and your service at OneID, and how has that been influenced from the changes over the last couple decades?
Yeah, well, so every situation is different, and when we started OneID, I had a vision of here's what I wanted to do, and I contacted people who were really talented in the engineering side, and it turned out that the guy who had the most engineering smarts and talent and could give me an instant team, and it was really inexpensive. It turns out that he was in Austin, and that is what I'd call geographically undesirable, because in a startup company you really want to have everybody in the same building and everybody working together, and it is really tough if you're spread out over two different areas, especially when you're so far apart, right? It's a several-hour plane ride, well, with things like Skype and Google Hangouts and so forth, you can make it so that it's not as bad, but I don't think there's any substitute for FaceTime and being in the same building. So when we started off, this guy was just so number one, he was so exceptional, and number two is that he could build up a team of 10 people instantly in Austin, and plus they'd be much cheaper than building it in Silicon Valley with the same level of talent. So that was a little bit too hard to resist. I'm not sure that was the right call. But it was at least a reasonable decision based on the pros and cons. So ideally, everybody in the same place, but if you have a special situation that we were willing to consider doing that. And it's actually worked out pretty well, because then these guys can be totally focused, right? And we're arguing about, well, should the strategy be this and this, and nobody's being defocused. So in a sense, it's good to decouple them, because then they can stay focused on.
And that's an interesting segue to culture. I mean, you've probably had aspects that were similar in parts of culture across the 6 companies and differences because of the people.
Yeah.
How do you, I'd love to hear your comments on culture and then in relation especially to having a distributed team at this early of a stage.
Yeah, I think culture is really, really important to sit down at the beginning and say, hey, what do we stand for and what are the values, and just be consistent with that. And in some sense, you read a lot of books that say, hey, it really doesn't matter what values you pick. You can pick any set of values as long as you're consistent and people know what it is and can all play by the same set of rules. That's the more important thing. And I read the story of Zappos and played golf recently with David Vick, who was the culture guru at Zappos. So it was really interesting in talking to him, because he's kind of like Zappos, the extreme case of culture in the extreme. And in my case, of the companies that we've had various emphasis on culture in the various companies, and you could say, hey, startup company, you got to focus on the product, and what are you doing this culture stuff? This is softy feely stuff. But it turns out that it's pretty important, more important than people think.
Do you assert there's a high correlation between
great
culture, great success?
Because great culture attracts great people. Mm-hmm. Right, yep, and what you want to do is have people come to work, and it's like family. They want to be there, mm-hmm. and they have the freedom to make mistakes, and they have the freedom to try to wow the customer. That sort of
ideally,
thing.
Work isn't work.
Right.
I think really
that's right. That's right. Right. And what's funny is that Zappos has this very unique culture, and people come to Zappos and they look at the just to see the culture. Is this for real? Mm-hmm. Right? Is there really a throne here that you can sit on? And when Amazon was purchasing was Zappos, one of the guys came and he sat on the throne, and so he kind of wondered, well, is Zappos successful because of their culture or in spite of their culture? And so people on the outside actually ask that question. But if you ask people on the inside, it's a pretty clear, absolutely, the culture is a big part of our success. So that's
really interesting.
It's an interesting insight.
Well, Steve, thank you so much for coming on the Founder Stories. And thank you for watching, and we'll talk to you next time.